有法定人數過晒鐘。
We have a quorum and it's past the appointed time. This is the Bills Committee on Waste Disposal Amendment Bill 2013. Now we proceed with the election of chairman. We will follow the Appendix 4 to the House Rules. Nominations, Ms. Sit Ho, seconded by Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Sit Ho accepts. All right. No need for a vote. Let's invite the administration to join us.
阿志偉可唔可以坐到尾㗎？幾多點啊？
我兩邊走㗎。
呢度3個都係嘅，其實。OK。嚇，我哋開得幾耐得幾耐啦嚇，咁就嚇。係
咯。得我哋3個咋？
唔係，人就有10個嘅咁上下。係，李卓人會晏啲到，不過唔知幾晏啊。辛苦啦，環保署官員近來嚇。
Well, the Environmental Protection Department has been working very hard recently. We have with us Assistant Director of Environmental Protection, Deputy Director, Mr. Albert Lam, accompanied by Assistant Director of Environmental Protection, Mr. Sau-lan, and Mr. David Wong. From the Department of Justice, Mr. Peter C., Senior Government Counsel. Albert, are you going to take us through the electrical brief? Yes. Good morning, members. This is the Waste Disposal Amendment Bill 2013. The object of the bill is to strengthen the disposal of construction waste on private land. In recent years, fly tipping on private land happens from time to time. Enforcement is not very effective. So we proposed this amendment bill. Previously, we have consulted the public. Let me give you some background information. What is construction waste? They generally mean any substance generated from construction work and abandoned. They include inert waste, and some may be reused, say, for example, rock, rubble, boulder, earth, soil, sand, concrete, asphalt, brick, tile, masonry, etc. And if they are not disposed on site, they will have to pay a statutory fee. In the principal legislation, regulation of this, the disposal of such waste is provided for. One needs a valid authority, or one needs an authority or excuse at the time of disposal, or with the consent of the owner or the legal occupier at the time of the disposal. Otherwise, the person has contravened Section 16A bracket 1 of the ordinance. Since enforcement is not very effective, we've encountered problems. If we are to prove that there is no authority or consent given by owners or legal occupiers, we encounter difficulties when we collect evidence, because some may be incomplete or there may be conflicting information, and sometimes it will take more than the statutory limit, which is 6 months, before we are able to collect the information. So the deterrence effect of the current ordinance is undermined. Under our proposal, there will be a new mechanism put in place. If a person is to deposit construction waste, a valid permission has to be obtained beforehand. And this permission has to be given by each and every owner of that lot. If the piece of land is of multiple ownership, then all of the owners have to give the permission. And the permission will have to be given by the Director of Environmental for acknowledgement. In the application for the acknowledgement, it is required under the proposal that the notification has to be given at least 21 calendar days before the intended commencement date of the depositing activity, and such application will have to be made in a specified form. Information therein include particulars of the landowners, and the relevant permission or the acknowledged form will have to be displayed in a conspicuous place of the lot. Owners and relevant parties will have to be informed of the depositing activity to be engaged in. The form will be circulated to other departments to notify them of such activities. Applicability. There are two proposals under applicability. All private land are included unless the area on which waste has been deposited is small, that is, no more than 20 square meters. Excuse me. And if the depositing activity is part of any building works commenced in accordance with Buildings Ordinance, application to the New Territories Ordinance, or the Buildings Ordinance on the lot concerned, then the amendment bill will not be applied. Penalties. For first offenders, it's a maximum fine of $200,000 and imprisonment term for up to 6 months. For repeated offense, the fine and the fine will be higher. Before I open the floor for members to ask questions, a legal advisor, have you sent any correspondence to the administration? Any unresolved matters? We sent a letter to the administration asking questions on the bill. The administration indicated that they would need some more time to give us a reply. Can you take us through the letter? Can you tell us about the questions you've asked? They concern policy and also explanation of the bill. You'll find the information on the paper.
Members, please take a look of paper CB bracket 11505/12 to 13 bracket 03. Altogether, there are 12 questions. Maybe members in a moment ask questions. Some of the questions will be related to those in your paper. I now open the floor to members. I don't set a time limit. We just raise our hand. If you would like to stop the first member from speaking, you just notify me. First of all, Mr. Wu Chi-wai, Madam Chair, just want to seek a clarification. According to the new regime, I want to know how much can we do? To be more exact, let me rephrase in this way. Currently, we already see a lot of fly tipping activities. With your proposal, I want to know to what extent the fly tipping activities will be subject to the notification mechanism that you're proposing. Second, the exemption. The threshold is set at 20 square meters. The reason given is simple. That is because during the public consultation exercise, there was the suggestion to have an exemption mechanism. Please tell us about the rationale. That is, how come that we need to allow people to reserve a certain area on his own lot for the disposal of construction waste, and other than setting the benchmark of the area, don't you think that it's better to set it in terms of the volume, and then we can sort of really address the problem that someone may need to have an area for the disposition of construction waste? Mr. Lam, the number of permissions to be sought. Well, currently we have fly tipping, so we haven't been notified as it is illegal in nature. Whether it is for a short time or whether it has been subject to complaints, we don't have an idea. What we want to do is to have something preventive in nature. Now, currently, people know that we have problems with enforcement. In the future, with the introduction of the new mechanism, everybody would know that will be much facilitated in our law enforcement. This will enhance the deterrent effect, and then we can have a better idea about the situation. As to your second and the third questions, you talked about exemption. In paragraph 8A of the paper, we have explained that the exemption will be for an area no more than 20 meters square. This is a feedback from the public consultation as to why we should give some exemptions. Because someone may have a reasonable excuse to need an area for construction waste. We've been pointed out that if we have a broad brush approach, then we will be obstructing some reasonable sort of cases. Sometimes people may need a place for short-term disposition. An example that's been cited is that you may want to carry out some repair, maintenance, or decoration work at your home. You need to keep some construction waste within your own land. According to the law, you need to put in an application for permission in advance, but then it will be small scale and it is reasonable. Therefore, we believe that it is better to take care of it by providing for an exemption. We haven't sort of based it on volume. This is because usually we are talking about a large area being used, and then the height of the stack would vary. But you can see that in previous cases, usually they cover a large area. If we are also asked to have an estimate of the volume, it will aggravate the problem of enforcement. 20 square meters. 20 square meters can be quite a large area, alarmingly big. I fail to see how it is for the sake of home decoration. I think even if you have a overhaul of your house, everything can be filled, can be accommodated in a skip. So 20 square meters would be something quite substantial. So, and then if I'm a landowner, does it mean that if I get a permission, I'll have a legitimate place to keep the construction waste? Now, let me interrupt. A second member has raised his hand. Usually, we should be more relaxed when it comes to Q&A for bills. But then I just want to remind members that probably I will allow each member to have a go for 10 minutes, and then by 10 minutes you should stop and give the floor to another person. Mr. Wu, you have already asked your questions for 5 minutes. 4 by 5, 20 square meters. Approximately, how large an area is it? If it is a huge lot, that is what I mean is that if the base is very large, then 20 square meters, it is a small area. But then if it is 20 square meters out of a site of 40 square meters, then it is a different picture. Madam Chair, I think we need to look at the previous cases. Previously, the serious cases of fly tipping can be sort of I think in the past we were talking about long-term and large scale of fly tipping. I don't quite grasp the idea of Mr. Wu's first question. Now, you talk about a small area. Well, technically speaking, you say that it will be difficult to assess the volume of the construction waste, but then 20 meters square can take up quite a large area, and it can accommodate quite a large volume of construction waste. Now, if I'm a landowner, if I allow my site to be open to others to deposit construction waste, if I get your permission, then it means that I can collect a fee and allow others to live there to dump the construction waste on my site. Let's give Mr. Lam some warm water. Fine, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, in this case, for the Waste Disposal Amendment Bill 2013, if you need to keep some construction waste, there is a mechanism for you to get a permission. As to why we've come up with this idea, maybe in a moment my colleague can elaborate on this point. What happened in the past was such that someone did not have the permission of the landowner, and he already started to dump the construction waste. So if the landowners already have this right to do so, and if such an activity doesn't contravene other statutory requirements, then the landowner is allowed to do so. Now, even if all landowners agree to do certain things, they still have to meet all other legal requirements. So the consent on its own is not adequate. If you need other types of permission, you are still required to do so. Mr. Wu asked us for the rationale for the benchmark of 20 square meters. This is the result of public consultation. Now, sometimes if you keep it for a short period of time, you don't need to impose the restriction. What has happened in the past was that people did not actually want to keep it to 20 square meters. In fact, the scale was growing and growing. And so if we confine it to 20 square meters, there will be deterrent effect. In other words, they won't turn the whole site into a dumping ground for construction waste. Maybe my colleagues can elaborate. Yes. Mr. Wong. Madam Chair, the member talked about fly tipping on private land. If I may give some figures. For private land in the past 5 years, that is between 2008 and 2012, the EPD on average received over 100 cases of complaint. The there were almost 180, 190 cases in 2010. In relation to the complaints, as the deputy director has said, we have multiple land ownership. Allow me to clarify a point first. What I want to say is that if the landowner is to put in an application and say that his site is available for dumping of construction waste, I don't want to legitimize the activities of fly tipping as a result of this bill. Mr. Lam has said, he said that it will still be subject to other statutory controls. Say, for example, harmful substances are not to be handled inappropriately. We have over 1,000 pieces of legislation. I don't know about the specific legislation involved. Mr. Wu, it's difficult for you to ask for an answer on the spot. It doesn't matter. They can give us an answer in writing later. You are sort of asking them to screen all the legislation. Probably the officials can think of a couple of legislation off the cuff, but they may want to do some work to be exhaustive. Madam Chair, well, what we want to do now is that currently, under the waste disposal ordinance, when we receive a complaint, sometimes it is difficult to enforce the law because of the difficulties in gathering evidence. So what we are proposing is that we would like to enhance our control. We are not sort of legitimizing the fly tipping activities. Well, other departments may also get involved, and probably the planning department will be at the forefront. That is, whether the use is in line with the land zoning. For example, for agricultural land, if you allow dumping of construction waste, probably you have to look at the restrictions and slope, waterworks may also come into the picture. So other departments may also have a say, and whether the construction waste will give rise to environmental nuisance. If that is the case, the FHD would come in as well. What happens now is that under the waste disposal ordinance, when you deposit waste, and not just construction waste, you need permission. But in reality, for construction waste, we have seen fly tipping and has been difficult to enforce the law. So the purpose of the bill is to address this area.
So you can't do whatever you want on that land. The same goes for in domestic premises. My understanding is that whether that is present or absent, other enforcement agencies can take action. It's not the case that, well, as long as I am the owner, I will not deal with what happens on my land. I just leave them there. Well, without the deposit, then no other regulations would have been broken or breached. Well, I don't really understand your question, Mr. Wu. And let's see if the administration does. If someone would like to engage in such activities, then they would have to apply for a permission. And we have set out in paragraph 7 that when we receive the permission, the EPD will circulate the same to other departments that the landowner has given the permission, and we have verified the owners against the list. So departments will be aware of this upcoming activity, and if they think it fit to, say for example, take some action, give some advice, and they can do so under the mechanism. My view is somewhat similar to that of Mr. Wu's, about the 20 square meters. The EPD said that they are concerned about the waste being piled up. But what about the waste going in the other direction, going underground? That would be the same concern. So how did you set the 20 square meters? And what about private streets? When we see the amendment bill, we will think of rural land, but on a lot of private streets, fly tipping take place, and it's difficult to coordinate or try to approach 7 or 8 owners, let alone getting their permission. Very often, a dump truck would just leave several bags of waste in the street. So what is your current approach? Would you just prosecute the owners' corporations involved? But they themselves are actually victims, because their street has been used as a dumping ground. Administration, does it include private streets? This enhanced regulation does not target landowners. Through the permission mechanism, we hope that there will be a proper procedure in place. If they haven't gone through the established procedure to obtain permission, then we can take enforcement action. And if some waste is simply dumped on a private land, if we can catch the culprit under the current provisions in the ordinance, we have to verify whether any of the owners have given permission, and that itself is difficult. So under our proposal, before the dumping activity takes place, permission will have to be obtained from all owners. And if we catch the culprit and we find that there is no such permission given in written form, then it will facilitate our law enforcement action. It's not the case that we were trying to target landowners. In relation to 20 square meters, in a consultation we proposed that there is a need for proper for disposal of construction waste. The majority of the material obtained from construction and demolition can be reused, and they can be reused in other works projects. And as to how we draw the line, members wonder whether 20 square meters is appropriate. We have drawn reference from previous experience, and we try to strike a balance and set it down at 20 square meters. And we think this has struck a balance. Just now Mr. Kwok Wai Keung asked about 20 square meters. At the same time, he asked, well, if you just use the superficial area, then no one knows whether they have dug a deep hole in that area. Well, I think if someone goes through the effort to dig a hole, I think it'll be easier to catch them. But sometimes the landowner has already left Hong Kong. So, can you tell us, administration, if someone digs a huge hole on the private land without permission, well, first is trespassing, and are there any other provisions that come into play? Even without the bill, trespassing is against the law. And of course, when it comes to rural land or in the new territories, there are no fences or anything. Yes, well, so for private land, unless the owner takes our litigation, then nothing will be done. And if the owner's not there, then no one knows. According to the administration's paper, there is an additional procedure to be followed. You need to obtain written permission from all owners and do so 21 days prior to the activity. So, well, it doesn't mean that you will not break the law. But just now Mr. Kwok asked about private streets. I think it is related to one of the questions raised by legal advisors, that is, in relation to private land. We are awaiting the administration's answer. I will also ask the same question. Will it affect the definition of land under other land legislations? Legal advisor's 12 questions are not answered yet, and some of the questions raised today may be the same as those asked by the legal advisor. And Mr. Kwok, you haven't finished you used up your time. First round, Mr. Charles Mock. So, from your experience and from what you can tell in the future, how can you tell who the depositor is? How do you find the culprit? And in past cases, have you managed to find the culprit? What if a thief comes into your house, breaks into your house and left? Then you wouldn't know who it was. Yes, in reality, there is enforcement difficulty. When fly tipping is discovered, we have to conduct investigation. Of course, we'll have to find the culprit. We encountered difficulties on private land because we don't know whether the owner has given permission. And that is the difficulty we face in enforcement. And if we find the owner who says that no permission has been given, then under 16A of the Waste Disposal Ordinance, we can initiate prosecution. And let me supply you with some information. Dump truck driver associations, on their own initiatives, install GPS on their trucks. So when something happens, those with GPS can be tracked as to find out whether they have been to the site in question. The labor union proposed to turn this into a good practice or a requirement under the law, but some people are concerned about infringement of privacy and visibility. And I think we have to leave it between the administration and the trade. I don't think the question is answered. If there is a GPS, then it may be the case. But in past cases, can you tell us what's the chance of finding the perpetrator? You told us about difficulties, but how big is that difficulty? Can you share with us your experience? And what about the suggestion mentioned by the chairman? Would you consider it? After the bill's been endorsed, can you set down some kind of guidelines for the trade? Or perhaps let me answer the first question. We encountered difficulties. As I've said, in rural areas, we may be talking about a huge area. We have manpower and resources consideration. It is difficult for us to have eyes and ears all over the place. So there is enforcement difficulties. For areas that are black spots, and people very often complain about such areas, and then we will lay ambush in these areas to see if we can catch the culprit. Under the current practice, this is one of our major tactics in enforcement. And even if we catch the perpetrator, if it involves private land, as my colleague has said, we have to find the owner in question or the illegal occupier to find out whether permission has been given. And perhaps the owner would like, the owner has given permission. The member has mentioned that for some private land in the rural area, the owners may not be in Hong Kong, or there may be some complications in title. But we try our best to find the landowner before we can ask whether permission has been given. So even if we find the suspect, we will have to verify whether there is permission. And it's somewhat difficult. Sometimes, even after the statutory limit of 6 months, we still are unable to ascertain the information. In the past 5 years, on average, on private land every year, the EPD has received complaints against fly tipping stands at about 100 cases or so. In the past few years, successful prosecution of fly tipping on private land last year, 2. 2011, 1. 2009 and 10, when the problem was rather rampant, 12 cases. So, successful prosecution is on the low side. Well, this is an interesting figure. So, only 1 or 2 cases see a successful prosecution out of 100. Where's the problem? Problem with proving the case or what?
當然係一個
There were a number of reasons. For example, the same site may attract a number of complaints. In some other cases, when we went to the scene, they have already filled the ground and they have already stopped the activities. So even for us to lay ambush or to carry out spot check, we could no longer find further fly tipping. What about cases like the owner spotted the fly tipping activity? He could even jot down the registration number plate, but then he was just by himself. By the time the police arrived, the culprit had already left. And it would be most frustrating for the owner. But if you have already got the number plate, say for example someone came and deposited the construction waste overnight, you would be quite angry, but then you couldn't hold anybody liable. We receive complaints from the public, either the landowner himself or the neighbors. So it is an indicator when we have over 100 cases, so someone must have seen it and then they complained to us. There must be a time lag because we went on duty round the clock. So for us to be successful in catching the culprits red-handedly, or by laying ambush, it will be very difficult. So you need to be able to catch the offender red-handedly. you are not able to have successful prosecution despite the landowner being able to supply you with a registration number plate. But of course, ultimately, we have to look at the merits of individual cases. If we find that the evidence is strong enough to have a prima facie, then we'll try to start a prosecution. But then, as I have said, we need to identify the culprit who deposited the construction waste, or someone has come forward and identify the offender. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Madam Chair. Having listened to the discussion that's been ongoing, I think the area to be covered by the amendment will be small. Now, what it means is that you'll be facilitated in your prosecution by having this amendment when someone is caught having fly tipping. So we're looking at a very narrow scope. Allow me to follow up, assuming that somebody has deposited certain construction waste on the site and the landowner doesn't agree to such an activity. And does it mean that the landowner has to deal with the problem? I think the landowner has to find money which is substantial in size to clear the construction waste. If not, he'll be subject to summoning. Now, if the landowner has financial hardship and he can't easily remove the construction waste quickly, well, what do you do in such cases? Do you tolerate the situation, or do you allow them to await for prosecution of the offender, and then he can claim back from the offender? But what about if there is the depositing of medical waste unlawfully, and this may give rise to a hazard? Of course, you will clear it for the owner, and you try to ask the landowner to reimburse you. But what happens if the landowner is poor and lacks the financial means? It's difficult to answer the question. For the fly tipping, you would like to know to what extent we can address the problem by having this amendment. I think members are right. Currently, even if we can catch the offender, when it comes to collection of evidence for prosecution, we have faced with a large number of problems. So with the amendment in the bill, we are now imposing an additional requirement, namely permission, and it will be registered with the EPD, and the endorsement or the permission given by the given has to be displayed on the site. So if someone sees another person depositing the construction waste, and if a permission is not seen, then I think everything can flow more smooth quickly, and then if we want to know whether permission has been given, we just check with the EPD. If there isn't any permission registered with the EPD, then we can lay one more charge. Not that we're interested in having a second charge, but we want to impose a stronger deterrent effect, because before he actually deposits the construction waste, he knows that he will be faced with a further offense or further charge. Now, if a landowner finds that the activity carried out by a third party is contaminating his land, the EPD, of course, has certain requirements, and other departments like the planning department may also impose certain requirements. And as the chair has said, the landowner may go after the offender to pay compensation. But what would happen in the interim if he hasn't yet been compensated by the offender and yet he lacks the financial means to remove the waste? Madam Chair, under the waste disposal ordinance, we don't say that they have to remove the waste on their own. During the public consultation exercise, we have been told that, say, for example, under the town planning ordinance, if you contravene the ordinance, you need to reinstate the case, but it is lacking under the waste disposal, and I don't think the amendment exercise can address this point. Mr. Wu, any follow-up? Madam Chair. Well, it appears to me that for the waste disposal arrangements, there are things which are related but not to be covered by the bill. It's of great concern to us. I think members of the public are concerned as to how the construction waste can be removed after they have identified the culprit. It appears that we haven't got anything new here. You have to go by the existing mechanism, and you need to get the help from other departments. So I hope the department can sort of sort out the information for us. It appears that the bill only seeks to amend the law to a very small extent, and the coverage of the bill is going to be quite limited. You may very well enhance the deterrent effect, but what is of great interest to me is that for the landowner who is in fact a victim, other than taking the offender to court in a civil action, you haven't got other recourse to address the problem. Allow me to illustrate with an example, but I don't know whether it is going to be of help. Say, for example, a burglar comes into your house, he damages a lot of your properties, maybe he breaks open your door, and then he damages your flat, and then he's caught. Of course, he has criminal liability, but then he has broken your TV set, and then are you going to replace your TV set, or do you expect the government to replace it for you? Of course, you usually have insurance coverage for your household content, but probably this isn't the case for agricultural land. I don't know whether you can get insurance for that. In the past, when we saw this happening, either the landowner took part in the fly tipping and yet denied having taken a part. Now, with the amendment exercise, it means that the landowner can no longer use this as an excuse. But still, I think the landowner will not be assisted at all in trying to get compensation from the offender unless you take him to court in civil action or you are covered by insurance. So if I sort of, when I just now I drew a comparison with the burglary, it will be difficult to expect the government to bear the cost. So it's better to sell your land back to the government. Madam Chair, you cited an example. I cannot think of a better one. You mentioned this point, and it was shared by other members. That is, individual landowners. I mean, the person depositing the construction waste may claim that he has got the consent from a landowner or some landowners. Now we try to address this problem. All landowners must sign to give the consent before the activity can be carried out, and then we can prevent the scenario in which landowner A was said to be the person giving consent, and then landowner C is a victim because no one has notified him. Currently, one of the landowners may give consent. In the future, all landowners must give consent, and this has to be displayed in the permission. I agree with what Mr. Wu has said. The problem that we can deal with here is very limited. But then when you introduce a piece of legislation, you may also give rise to other problems. Our legal advisor has asked as many as 12 questions. Now, what we are able to do would be quite limited, and yet definition of land, who is going to bear the liability, would it be the driver of the dump truck or whether the employer would be made liable? It seems that if we can't address those other concerns, then it will be quite worrying. Do you have other questions? And maybe the administration can find time to answer the 12 questions from the legal advisor. I'm grateful to the legal advisor for going into the details. Probably they are the main concerns. Now, the landowner may very well be the victim as well. So, administratively speaking, I hope you won't issue a summons against the landowner so quickly. Give him some time to clear away the construction waste, because the landowner is in fact the victim, and yet the landowner is being prosecuted for not clearing the construction waste, and it will be very costly.
What about government land in the urban area? Well, in the past, there has been some cases of flood. We found that some dump trucks, fly tip, construction sites are in some hidden spot under a flyover, and when there is heavy rain, there is flooding. So are there provisions covering government land in the urban area? Do they have to obtain permission from the owner of the government land? Has it been dealt with by legislation already? Under this particular bill, it covers private land. There is a mechanism for owners to give permission, whereas in government land, if there is no permission from any government department, fly tipping is illegal, and there are other mechanisms to deal with it. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, a very simple question. Let me give you an example. Someone dumps something in my home. Of course, I claim that that thing is not mine. And afterwards, well, because I didn't want to deal with it, or I didn't have the money to deal with it, and assuming the area affected is small and I don't mind having that extra weight, that waste on my land, is it just a small scale one, and can the landowners simply deal with it? Well, perhaps landowners, as we've asked, don't know how to deal with it. Of course, they should have fenced off their area. But what about treating the waste as the owner's own? Are there any problems with that? Well, if it's no more than 20 square meters, then there is no problem. You can have it covering an area of 19 square meters. So I well, I want that culprit to be caught, so I say I haven't given any permission, and the waste does not belong to me. And yes, the culprit is caught, and then the waste still remains on my land, and what if I don't deal with it? Under waste disposal ordinance, if chemical waste is involved, there is no requirement under the law for it to be disposed of, but there may be some misunderstanding. The ordinance is not to authorize someone to fly tip. The permission mechanism is to strengthen regulation. Any owner or occupiers may give a permission, verbally or in written form. Under 16b, there is a requirement of prior written permission from all landowners. It's not the case that we give them authority on the strength of the bill. There is a view from public consultation wondering whether the EPD can strengthen the authorization procedure. That is, all activities depositing activities will have to get the permission of the EPD. But this is not the objective of the bill. If in a case waste is deposited on an area smaller than 20 square meters, under our current proposal, it won't be covered. Then an existing procedure will have to be followed. And about what happens after prosecution. Well, construction waste does not include, construction waste with no chemical waste are not required to be disposed of. But when it comes to other government departments, it's not under our purview. I'm not familiar with legislations related to the new territories. And Mr. Lai mentioned about breach of land use. What about agricultural use? There may be other legislations covering it. Perhaps it's a fish pond. Well, if the pond is filled, then it's no longer a fish pond. Then have they broken the law? The landowner has the duty to make sure that the land is of a condition that is in line with the law. Say, for example, is a conservation area. Land is resumed or acquired. Then the land cannot be used as farming land or fish pond. So what if a pond is filled or farmland is covered? Does the owner have the responsibility to reinstate the site to its original state? Well, but this is not under the purview of the ordinance. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with land legislation in relation to new territories. What if a fish pond is filled and a report is made to the police and the culprit is caught? So is it the case that under the ordinance a fish pond can only be a fish pond, or you can fill it up and still get away with it? Sorry, like you, I'm not very familiar with those legislations. Perhaps you can find the information and tell us later. We don't have legislators from the new territories. They will be very familiar with it. I know that there is the difference between agricultural land and non-agricultural land. If land is covered, is it still agricultural land? Mr. Wu Jiwai asked you how many pieces of legislations have been breached, you may have a hard time trying to dig up all the relevant information, but we need it. You may catch the offender, but what about reinstatement? Whose responsibility is it? Should be the responsibility of the owner, right? I'm sorry, I have to leave the meeting. I've asked the same question. I would like the administration to give me the information. We're talking about rights and obligations of different stakeholders. We understand that the law you would like to strengthen your regulatory regime against fly tipping. But for members of the public, apart from catching the offender, reinstatement is very important too. How to reinstate the site? Would you also do something about it? When it comes to fly tipping, well, of course, they would the offender does it to avoid paying the fees, and sometimes landowners might use their land as a dump site by charging a fee. So is it the case that as long as a permission is made, that piece of land can be used as a legal dump site? And I understand that if it's not higher than 1 meter, it's all right. We would like to get the information so that we can consider it more thoroughly. I think we have reached a stage on which we've asked more or less all the questions. Can the administration tell us the timetable? We're in mid-July now. And of course, you expect to come back in October, so there is no urgency. You can consider the issues more thoroughly. And I'd like to ask members, would you like to have a public hearing? I know that the Labour Union of dump truck drivers has something to say. Well, we don't have many members. Perhaps we need to ask all the members whether they would like to invite deputations to talk to us, so that we will know better about the situation. Well, I don't have a preference. If we are to have a public hearing, can we have it before the end of July? Well, I don't know whether other members are available. Perhaps we'll wait till September. We would like the administration to take their time to give us a detailed answer to the legal advice's questions, and also about legislations and requirements in relation to reinstatement. Well, thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.
係咯。